Good morning. Well, I've spent the past week in a much bigger arena, which is the nonpartisan event, so I can't tell you where I was. I will say this. I had written a great speech for you guys, and I laid it down, and I couldn't find it there in Charlotte. And I look up, anyway, I can't find my speech, and I look up, and that rascal Bill Clinton's up there giving it. So, I have to say something else. I'm glad it was well received. As a Tennessean, Clinton's from Arkansas, so we have our own beefs with them anyway. But as a Tennessean, to get serious and talk about what we're here to talk about, I grew up in a very different America than my nephews are growing up in. Same state, same country, totally different situation. My father was born in abject poverty. He was born in segregation. He grew up in the biggest black ghetto in the country at that time, Orange Mound, Memphis, bigger than Harlem. He joined the military in the middle of a conflict to get out of that neighborhood and to be able to get out and put himself through college, which he did. He didn't stop there. He then put his little brother through college. And then he put his cousin through college. And as a result, he was able to get out of poverty, get his whole family out of poverty. Then he became a junior high school principal, and he got many, many, many other kids out of poverty. There was a ladder that he was able to climb out of poverty. And there's something happening in our country now where the rungs on that ladder are starting to break. And it creates a tremendous opportunity, but also responsibility for those of us who are on the top side of that ladder to look back down and figure out what's going wrong and what can we do about it. Every single thing that my dad did as a pathway out of poverty is now becoming a trapdoor back into poverty. My dad went to college. You tell a young person to go to college today, is that good advice or bad advice? Half of the college graduates of the past year are unemployed. Half. When I say unemployed, they're not working at Wendy's, right? They're not working the job they worked when they were in high school before they went to college. They graduate every spring off a cliff into the worst economy since the Great Depression. My dad went to college and he was able to get a job in the public sector. He became one of these horrible enemies of the people called public employees, right? You've heard of these horrible threats, right? We have to get rid of these public employees. I was raised badly. We didn't call them public employees when I grew up. We called them teachers, nurses, firefighters, cops, librarians. So I have to confess I was raised badly, but those jobs are being decimated all across the country. It's the public sector jobs that are being destroyed. Often the first jobs out of poverty, becoming a postal worker. Think about your own families. And then my dad bought a house. A third of American houses now are underwater. If you're middle class, if you're an ordinary person, your home, that is your biggest asset. That is your nest egg. For 1/3 of Americans, when they sign that mortgage check, they're not gaining wealth, they're not building wealth, they're losing wealth. What is happening to the country? The things that were the pathways out of poverty are now trapdoors back into poverty for millions of Americans. 20 million Americans that were in the middle class, that made it, have fallen out of the middle class down into poverty. 20 million people. What's wrong? They are the casualties of an economic system that has collapsed and that has to be rebuilt. It has to be reimagined. It has to be reinvented. And that's what we're going to be doing here all day long. My job is to set up the conversation, so let me do so. What was wrong with the economy that just collapsed. What happened? It had 4 critical features that made it incredibly vulnerable. Number 1, it was based on consumption rather than production, right? You remember this? You can't remember now because we're all so broke. But there was a time, right, when the great symbol of the U.S. economy was no longer the factory where things were being made. It was the shopping center, right? And we all bought into this. Both political parties said, hey, listen, we'll send the factories overseas. We don't have to produce anything here. We're just all going to go shopping, right? What could possibly go wrong, right? And then people started saying, well, does this really make sense? People, oh, of course, because we'll be able to shop online too. Oh, okay, well, fine, I'll just go ahead. And the factories left, and so, consumption rather than production. Number 2, credit rather than smart savings and thrift like our grandparents. Our grandparents had this really bizarre thing in their lives that your peers have never heard of called a down payment. Remember that? Suddenly we lived in a country where you open up your mailbox, remember this? And credit cards would just fly out, just here. Are you a carbon-based being? Have a credit card, right? And so we built the whole economy up on credit cards. Number 3, ecological destruction rather than ecological restoration. Just paving the country, chopping down forests, paving over farmland, dumping megatons of carbon in the atmosphere. Again, what could possibly go wrong with that? And then lastly, the ethic, extreme individual consumption. The idea, and if you have an economic problem, you got to solve it yourself. You got to go out and get a second job or a third job, or your spouse has got to get a second job or a third job, or you got to use your house as an ATM, or you got to get another credit card. You are going to individually, in your own isolation, solve all your problems by yourself. Well, you put those 4 things together: consumption, credit, ecological destruction, and extreme isolated individualism. That is the definition of the economy that just collapsed. What will fix it? The reverse. What we're here to talk about. How do we build an economy that's based on production, local production, more than consumption? Let's start making things again. How do you build an economy based on thrift, based on conservation, based on our grandparents' wisdom again? How do we have not a do-it-myself economy, but a do-it-together economy, an economy that's more of a barn-raising approach? Let us be a nation of neighbors and help each other again. And how do we respect the earth? If that is the definition of the economy we have to build. And we are in a situation, and where as tough as things are in the country, people are paying attention. Nothing like sitting on a white-hot stove, right? To get the audience to pay attention. People say, they get distressed by the food fight in Washington, D.C. And we tend to think that that's some barometer where the country is. I go all over the country. I get a chance to talk to people. For one thing, me. When I go to a community, only 2 people show up. You guys and the Tea Party, right? That's who shows up. So I get to talk to everybody. And we're a lot more alike than we are different. See, this is not a left-wing period in the country, and it's not a right-wing period in the country. It's a turbulent, volatile period. You had Obama, he came out of nowhere. And then the Tea Party came out of nowhere. Then Occupy came out of nowhere. We don't know what's coming next. What we know is that out of nowhere has some design features. Right? When the needs of the people are not being met, new ideas can rush in.
And I think we're getting a little bit more wise now about what some of those ideas can be. Let me just share a few. If we're going to make progress as a country, as a human civilization, it's got to be bottom up and top down and inside out. Bottom up, top down, and inside out. Bottom up. Look at some of the incredible innovations that are already beginning to push up from the bottom, that are green, that are based on collaboration. The shareable economy, the solidarity economy, the new economy is already sinking deep roots in the Bay Area, here on the West Coast, and all around the world as people begin to realize, yes, incomes may come down. It may, in fact, be the case that the average income may come down or may go up slower than I had thought. But my quality of living can go up if I share, if I reach out, if I live in a nation of neighbors. And technology and new companies are now helping people to do that. You can go to shareable.net and see a whole discussion going on about companies like relay rides, where people who have cars that are sitting there while they're inside working can be used and rented out with people who don't have cars. So that one car can be used by many people. The owner of the car gets some income. The person who can't afford a car gets to use the car. And suddenly, everybody is better off without cutting down one tree or digging up any more iron or without polluting the atmosphere. Using what we have. Kiva, Kickstarter, Airbnb, people beginning to crowdsource, share their dollars. Maybe the big financial institutions won't be there for us in the same way, but we can be there for each other. The bottom-up innovation is working. People say, well, is that going to be enough? No, but it will be a key cornerstone in the rebuilding. We're going to talk about that today, the shareable economy and strengthening it. Our moral obligation has to be, with this shareable economy, though, is to make sure that the people who right now are developing it as a cool lifestyle choice recognize that there are some people for whom it's life or death. You see, right now it's a cool, hip lifestyle choice, but for some people it's life or death, and we need to be able to make sure that we don't have an elite, shareable, hip space that leaves out the people who really need to be a part of an economy that can help, with people helping each other. That's important. It's also important that we recognize that when we ask people to share, we're doing something kind of hard. I have two little boys. Sharing is tricky. It's how you come at somebody on the sharing thing. If you have to share, sharing sucks. If you get to share, sharing's great, right? It's called making friends, right? Same with this next generation. If you're stuck at home living with your mom and you have to share the couch with your ne'er-do-well cousin who didn't go to college and has been sitting there playing Nintendo for 4 years, and you did, and you're sitting next to him, no job, and you got $20,000 in debt, sharing the couch with your ne'er-do-well cousin, that sucks, right? Yeah, you're sharing because you feel the system screwed you. But if you've made a choice that you want to be a part of a community of people helping each other, and you're sharing because you're saying, screw the system, sharing is cool, okay? So how we deal with the shareable economy is critical. How we hold it, how we hold each other. But it's also got to be top down. America's government has to be a partner. Let's not get so out here that we imagine that we can just, Etsy our way to an economy that works for everybody. You use a search engine, Etsy. I love Etsy. I got some cufflinks on for them right now. But it ain't enough. America's government can't be missing in action. America's government should be a partner to the American people in this crisis. People say, well, America's government can't do that. America's government is broke. No. America is the richest country in the history of the world right now. Our economy right now, while we're on our back, is almost twice as big as China's. And we got a third of the population. Our economy right now, flat on its back, is almost as big as all of Europe's. Okay? America's not broke. America's being robbed by folks who don't want to pay their taxes, by folks who'd rather put the money in the pockets of the warmongers and the war profiteers. We're using the money that we have to support the economy that's hurting us, whether you're talking about big finance or big military or big polluters. But those dollars can be redirected to help rebuild the country and take all those young people off those sofas and put them to work doing the work that needs to be done, putting up solar panels and helping young folks and old folks and rebuilding the country. We have the resources. What we have to have is the will. Bottom up, the new technologies. Bottom up, the new tools. Bottom up, the new insights. Top down, America's government being a partner to the American people again. But none of that's going to make it if we don't have an inside-out change. There is a fundamental question on the table for the American people. There's a fundamental question on the table for the human family as a whole. This is going to be a tough century. This is going to be a tough century. 7, 8 billion of us trying to find our way to a just and sustainable outcome on a planet designed probably for about 1 billion. That is going to be a challenge to us morally, economically, ecologically. Who and what we are as a human species is on trial in this century. And the choices that we make individually and together will determine whether there will even be a 22nd century. What is a fundamental question that has to be asked and answered by the entire human family, and certainly by us here in the most diverse country in the history of the world? In the face of these crises, are we going to turn to each other or on each other? That's the question. And what we're here today to talk about is how we build a politics, a worldview, but most importantly, economic models that bless us and reward us for being willing to turn to each other. Thank you very much. Thank you.